If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 16 ghostly guilds in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Pardoners Guild and their Castigate Arkonos. Weapons and the infrastructure are all fine and dandy things to keep in mind when reinforcing and fighting back the Might of Oblivion, as we have discussed many a time before. Maelstrom, Spectre, and heavens know what have done their best to destroy all in their path, each to their own purpose. Well, excluding Maelstroms, those are just incredibly violent storms, but there is one foe amongst almost every wraith that no one has been fully able to beat, to dominate in submission, to champion as Charon has done so many things times during his life, his unlife, if such a term exists. No, what I'm referring to is the shadow that exists within those in the underworld. Since the Sundering, it has become the battle that will last through the ends of time for the poor sods with very little means of protection beyond their own will. We have looked at some external help some wraiths may receive, depending on the legion they are with or try to strike business with. Such help, however, is mainly focused on tonight's focus, the Pardoners Guild, whose proto-religious structure and relationship with the Arkonos Castigate has played an interesting yet vital role in Stygia's history, for better and for worse. But what is Castigate exactly? Well, it has two purposes. One of them is more well-known than the other. The lesser-known willpower of this Arkonos is to produce some sort of shield to protect one and their circle, their compatriots, from the might of Maelstrom for a brief time. Its main use, however, is that it allows one to learn what drives and feeds the shadow in order to learn how to weaken its grip. Without it, the power of every wraith shadow would be left unchecked, so it is by far the most welcome of Arconi in Stygian society. It is an Arkonos that allows minimal control, especially when you consider doing business with the shadow. It's very risky and dangerous business indeed, be it their own or the shadows of others. It can be even more dangerous when it's employed to frighten and intimidate spectres. It provides plenty of customization. No, not customization, personalization. Yes, that would probably be the better word for it. A pardoner, whether belonging to the guild or someone that is just well versed with the Castigate Arkonos, may use physical force, psychology, meditation, intimidation, sermons, some form of ritual purification, drumming, taunts, sensory deprivation, or any other possible method. You can't expect me to list all of them, dear listener, though I will say that our research has told us that many people have a kind of dialogue based on a shadow's nature, a process they call Devil's Dialect. Dealing with the shadow constantly does take its toll on a wraith in a physical sense. No doubt it is all very taxing, being what is essentially an incredibly demanding therapist. It is said that those that are well versed with Castigate have black stains on their fingers from where they, the Pardoner, have grappled with the shadow. As the Pardoner grows more versed with the Arkonos, the stains work up their fingers and hands before travelling up their arms. We at the Phoenix Institute have no idea as to whether this hurts the Pardoner, but I have suspicions that said body parts may feel different, perhaps rougher or even slimy. I have no basis for these guesses, but it wouldn't surprise me if the body parts were not affected in such a manner. Maybe a more accurate term would be infected in this manner, perhaps? Perhaps in good time we'll be able to conduct our own research on this and find out more. Where we lack information on the guild marks of the Pardoners, for that is what these black stained scars are, we do have plentiful resources regarding the history of the Pardoners. This, dear explorer, is top secret. This is knowledge I did not share with you before because I could not be immediately sure I could trust you. That, and to be totally honest, to share what I'm about to share with you during our original conversation about the history of the underworld and Stygia would have all been too much for you to take on at the time. It would have made much sense, as I'm sure you will soon understand. The story of the Pardoners Guild starts with its first member, a Mycenaean woman born as Inacius. To the wraiths of the Pardoners Guild, she is Sister Acceptance. From our studies, we know she is very interested in becoming a priestess from early in her human life. While she was taught in all things about gods, history, and mathematics, and learned how to read and write, granting her quite an unusual education at the time, she was murdered en route to meet her husband in an arranged marriage. She was amongst some of the first wraiths to traverse the rivers of death, guided by Charon, to inhabit the land of the Isles of Sorrows that would one day become Stygia. She would support Charon to assist those across the sunless seas to the farther shores and help these wraiths find peace. Most important of all, she took the Lady of Fate's word to her heart by helping those find the light within, making it her very being. With the Sundering, she, amongst a few other wraiths, could see the stain of impurity within wraiths and had the power to quell now increased loudness of their voices. Working together, they would call themselves Purifiers. They gained quite the reputation, as one might expect, and in case you are wondering, many within the guild would say that the Arkonos is the oldest too. Sister Acceptance would approach Charon, who at that point was the power-hungry Fruit Loop, focusing on his original purpose of helping and guiding those with transcendence, as requested by the Lady of Fate. The Purifiers would join alliances with the Shining Ones, who provided the Purifiers with all that they needed in the Sunless Seas to do their work together. This would carry on for centuries, the number of Purifiers blossoming, officially banded together as a sworn society. Amongst their numbers were Hippocrates, yes, the very same. He worked with the Purifiers to create the oath that states they would aid each other to pass their knowledge on to worthy candidates and to swear, and what they would use the art of castigates only to help, never to harm. It was during that time that when the guild was offered their own residence in Stygia, bestowed by Charon himself, many wanted Sister Acceptance to step up to the mantle of the leader of the guild, but when the Purifiers had allied themselves with a group known as the Fishers, who were worshippers of a form of Christianity unique to the underworld that flourished from approximately the 1st through the 16th centuries, you can probably guess that the Fishers were the foundations of many a heretic cult of the underworld, and during this golden age of Stygia, quickly became the largest faction in the underworld. With the advent of the first great maelstrom, the Purifiers would defend Stygia from overrunning shadows and spectres, probably serving as one, if not the main reasons, Stygia still exists. I said at the beginning of our discussion tonight, sticks and stones may break your bones, but shadows can, I don't know where I was going with this, but you get what I mean. Anyway, Stygia rebuilt itself following the first great maelstrom, following the collapse of Rome. We know Charon declared himself as emperor. He chose his Death Lords, and the Purifiers, Artificers, and Nemoi healed and judged respectively. The Purifiers allied themselves closely with Stygia's rulers as they built Caligia to help better teach and heal throughout the Middle Ages. When the title of guild became more political and granted the Purifiers far more status, the guild was aware it made them a professional organization and went about changing their name to acknowledge that change and indeed what was happening in the Skinlands of the time. Towns became larger for one thing, and the church became a more prominent force, with the Fishers I spoke of earlier took plenty of advantage of. On the Skinlands, going to church was difficult. The commute to the local church was quite the endeavour. Villagers had often no churches, so the church responded to this by sending ministers to grant missioners. These were known as pardoners, who retreated as saviors, some of them joining the Pardoners Guild in the afterlife. The Purifiers, they named themselves Pardoners after the honour of their labourers in the flesh and ongoing quest after death. It was just as much of a political statement that the Pardoners were still a spiritual brotherhood rather than a guild. Of course, the meaning of the name guild changed as Pardoner became a synonym for greed and corruption, nor did it help that there were so many a spectre hiding in the Pardoners' numbers, but that is a sentiment that counts, I suppose. The Pardoners would try and establish positive relationships with all the guilds, but when the Artificers were the first to claim the mantle of guild, despite the Pardoners debating being much older, war broke out. The War of the Guilds. The Pardoners had no interest in partaking in the War of the Guilds. They were peacekeepers, and the main reason why Charon did not step in sooner. The Pardoners only intervened to end the Artificers' arrogance and return to their strengthening of the guild alliances. The Pardoners made many attempts to end things peacefully and would eventually demand the guild sign a peace treaty. Those that didn't would receive help from the Pardoners. As you know, 13 out of the 16 agreed or were not invited, depending on your sources, to sign the compact creating a council to settle all future disputes. It is said that many of the guilds still loathe the Pardoners because of that day, and even letting the Artificers becoming so arrogant in the first place, taking a rather passive stance for far too long. The Pardoners did, however, stand with Charon disbanding the Nemoi Guild, who the Pardoners were close allies with prior, so they had that going as their saving grace. pun intended. During this time, the fishes became a major Stygian power as Europe was progressively Christianized, continuously making demands on Charon he refused to meet. They actually went so far as to attack the Onyx Tower and were subsequently crushed. This obviously upset the Pardonas and Charon greatly. This only worsened when they learned of the betrayal of the Shining Ones who were torturing and feeding on the souls of the restless they were meant to be helping. You know how Charon responded by shutting himself off to the tower for weeks. But what I didn't share with you is that, according to our records, it was Sister Acceptance that convinced him to leave, to which he responded by banishing the Shining Ones and branding them and their allies heretics. Whilst this did not include the Pardonas, many began to distrust the Pardonas for said alliance and religious persona. This was also a precursor to the Pardonas shift in how they viewed Charon, with Sister Acceptance believing Charon was losing control, sensing his shadow was driving him mad. Charon's inquisitors struck out anyone they deemed to be breaking the dictum mortem. Even the Pardonas were targeted by such onslaughts, despite the fact their gifts had no effect on the quick. Having lost faith in the Death Lords, knowing they were only interested in their internal power struggles, the Pardonas joined the revolt of the guilds to see Stygia ruled by more competent wraiths. The Pardonas, and indeed the rest of the guilds, underestimated the might of the legions, who tore apart the Pardonas. Sister Acceptance, knowing the breaking of the guilds not only was damaging Stygia, but Charon. She felt a terrible guilt for the revolt of the guilds, and wanted to help her long friend, but was also terrified to speak to him, in case she was sent to the forges, or worse. With heavy convincing from the guild, she visited him and was allowed to carry on her services. It was she that allowed the guild members to practice their callings as individuals under the aegis of legions. Of course, we both know that many chose not to do this, but carried on within the guild, and the Pardonas were no exception, aiding who and what they could. They used the breaking of the guild to their advantage, allowing them to go whoever they desired and wherever they desired, spreading their influence in the way with little discrimination, which carried on throughout the third and fourth Maelstroms, taking heavy losses during the fifth Great Maelstrom as Charon fought Gurul, the Godzilla-like Malthian, towards its end. What is known to only a few is that Gurul was possessed of the knowledge and animating force of Charon's shadow. Sister Acceptance and some other senior Pardonas know part of the tale. By the early 20th century, Charon's shadow was running amok. Even in the periods when Charon was free of catharsis, he was inevitably going mad. In order to prevent further damage to his sanity and Stygia, Charon submitted himself to a powerful and experimental castigation. The end result was that his shadow fled his corpus and took on a form all of its own, somewhat like the ritual of severance of the ferryman. What happened next is only known with a few of the depths of the labyrinth. Charon's shadow became there in time and wandered its length until it stumbled into Gurul's lair. The Neverborn devoured the shadow, absorbing its knowledge as he stripped out its consciousness and set that knowledge to use when he rose against Stygia. How did we get that information? Oh, that would be telling now, wouldn't it? A scholar is allowed to have some secrets, you know. What I will share with you now is that the guild is structured like many of the other Stygian guilds, beyond the breaking of the guilds, doing little in their behaviours and practices. They bear no hatred towards the heretics and try not to ask too many questions regarding the renegades, knowing their angry souls are more likely to succumb to oblivion. From our research, we haven't found any instances of Pardonas getting into trouble with the hierarchy for dealing with them, nor do the hierarchy feel the need to squash this guild, which works in the Pardonas' favour. Obviously, the Pardonas maintain close ties with the Monitors, serving as their connection to the Skinlands and to the fetters of their clients, which isn't all at all ominous. Besides this, Pardonas occasionally check on loved ones with their own fetters. Then they try and maintain strong relations with the Harbingers so they can make quick emergency visits via Argos. They follow the Artificers to do their work and claim their title of the first and oldest guild just to minimize arguments. There is some respect for their work also, seeing them as a necessary evil. The Pardonas also show an interest in the dream-weaving gifts of the Sandmen, especially as one of those powers allows one to cleanse the souls as the victim/patient/target sleep. The Pardonas do have their foes, mind you. They do not approve of the chaos spread by the spooks and haunters, nor have they forgiven the betrayal of the Yoceras. The puppeteers are not so fond of the Pardonas, wishing to learn of the secrets to become one of the Risen in order to help them, as the Pardonas word it. They, like so many of the guilds, hate and despise the Mnemoni. The Pardoners, like the other guilds, have their apprentices, journeymen, masters, and grandmasters, and they still have their guild houses, which, for the Pardoners, take up the form of churches, temples, covenants, or monasteries. Large necropoli or cities would have one large church and a few smaller ones, while a smaller necropoli, like a town, would only have one large guild house. Regardless of size or number, they hang their distinct iron lanterns that is set to collect angst and hung from their doors. The lantern represents the lighthouse of the Onyx Tower, guiding those lost souls to safety. Like the lighthouse, those who wish to find the Pardoners will find them with ease. All members of the guild of the journeyman rank or over are required to take the Pardoner's Oath in order to become a fully fledged guild member. The oath promises that a Pardoner will work for the benefit of a client or a sufferer of their shadow. There are some differences though. Guild houses are chapter houses, which serve as places of fellowship and instruction for apprentices before being allowed to do their practices in their own haunts. However, it is said that chapter houses do provide private rooms for castigations as well as remote venues for retreats, which is usually where the apprentices actually come from. The main difference is that the Pardoners still use their titles over the guild ones. The Pardoners do not take kindly to their secrets being shared and trust broken. Pardoners are usually very honest wraiths, and betrayal is not something even they take kindly upon. Anywho, apprentices are referred to as postulants, who study the guild's history and basic abilities of Castigate, learning rites of purification via observing the journeyman known as pledges. The journeyman/pledge is also charged with castigating their student, a painful process that, if the applicant survives, will enable them to grow stronger. To move forward, the supervising journeyman pronounces the apprentice ready and has them take the Pardoner's Oath. Pledges make up the core membership of the guild. Many become mentors, just as discussed, as they truly develop their own style of castigation. Their mentor, a master, will summon the journeyman to see if they are worthy to become a true pardoner or master, performing a rite of purification on them. Once becoming a pardoner, the guild masters turn their attention to applying castigation on spectres. Masters work in pairs, keeping a rigorous schedule of personal castigations in addition to being teachers to those below them, not just in pairs, that we know of, that is. Naturally, the more esteemed members of Stygian society call upon the aid of masters. Few make the status of grandmasters or master pardoner, as they are called here. They demonstrate exceptional skill in castigate, serving as mentors and ambassadors of the guild, as well as in making up the curia or guild rule makers and overseers. Many serve Death Lords and others in power. They answer to the Supreme Master, which is Sister Acceptance. She oversees the entire guild, serving as Master of Ceremonies and Initiations and approving of new castigate abilities. She also represents the Pardoners at meetings involving all the guilds. Similar to the Maskers from our last conversation, the Pardoners group themselves by their style of work, though just because you're considered to be one of a faction does not deny you access to a second or fourth one. Arguments are rare, and it is rarer still to have them cause true diversiveness. They are meant to be more forums of debate. Confessioners are the main practitioners of the Devil's Dialectic, shaming shadows into remorsive arguments. As the name would imply, this faction draws inspiration from the Catholic Church Sacrament of Confession, where the Wraith recites a litany of their sins, discusses them with the confessor, and receives penance in return for forgiveness. Not all comes from religious backgrounds, mind you, as we have heard one tale too many about many being a stereotypical barkeep. On the flip side, you have the Inquisitors that apply torture onto the Wraith. Whilst there are plenty of medieval pardoners, there are just as many, if not more, police investigators, detectives, and drill sergeants. This is somewhat different but similar to scourges that inflict physical punishment or suffering, using whips and flails and so forth. Similar religious personnel of old make up their numbers, as well as more modern military personnel, wrestlers, and the occasional school disciplinary. Psychics are somewhat more understanding. The Pardoners here are almost like psychologists in their practice of castigate. They tend to analyze and understand shadows rather than outright rejecting them, so both spiritual and scientific minds are littered here. We're also aware of some smaller ones that we need to do more investigation on, but have enough to briefly go over for you. The Crusades Crusaders are hardliners, eager to pursue and fight shadows, often using extreme tactics. The Scriveners are scholars fighting the shadow with lore and debates, and maintaining the Pardoners' library and records, and the Simonists, or brokers as they prefer, focus on Castigate's commercial possibilities with their guildmates do not look highly upon. I can see you're beginning to see that the Pardoners are not so squeaky clean as they first may have appeared to be. They prefer anonymity, assuming new names when they take up the Lantern, the Order of Purifiers of the Shadow, the Fellowship of Bestowers or Pardon, or simply the Pardoners adorn the names belonging to some mysterious cult and, in some senses, behave as such, bringing together wraiths of all works of life to heal and fight of all shadows of all. The Pardoners continue their work into modern times, needed more now than ever, as the Death Lords squabble amongst themselves and bring Charon's once great kingdom to slavery, war, and ruin. They've regained much of their strength since the breaking of the guilds and are awaiting the return of Charon to save Stygia from horrible times. Together, they hope to cleanse the underworld of Oblivion's presence as they strive for self-perfection, for no one pardons the Pardoner. They are a guild with few friends and fewer enemies. They are feared and respected with a strong presence across the underworld. They provide the help the Death Lords choose to neglect, knowing more than most they are unfit to rule Stygia, which is anything but the safe bastion of hope it was meant to be. They are one of, if not the largest guild, if the time is right to attempt to claim leadership for themselves. Let's face it, our world could certainly use some healing right now. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.